Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Alex Gorbunov from 3 Dots and CGschool. I'm going to be a presenter today. And today I'm going to tell you and I'm going to show you how to do the palm plants for your interior or exterior project because reality is that either in the past or maybe in the future, some of you already faced the problem of making this object or will definitely face it. So normally these objects from the first look, it looks very complex or somewhat complex, and normally it's a little bit scares people because it's got many elements, but in reality it's not that complicated. So I'm going to show you some cool technique how to make palm plants real quick for your interior or exterior projects with use of cloth and hair and fur modifier, and of course some modeling involved. So let's go ahead and switch to 3D Studio Max and reset it to start with nice and clean interface. Then go to front view and create plane object, something really narrow and long like you see I'm creating on my screen. Set number of length segments to 1 and number of width segments to 3. Make it a little bit longer, something like this. It doesn't matter what size it has right now at this point. It can be 500, it can be 1000. What important is the relation of the length to width, because it needs to be something long and really narrow, because we're going to turn it into the stem. Now convert this object into editable poly and apply bend modifier. In the top view, just play with the parameters of the bend modifier to bend it like this, like you can see I'm bending on my screen. So once you bend it, collapse it again into editable poly and select these top vertices of the object. And still being in a vertex of object mode, scale the selection of these vertices down along y-axis. Something like this, to straighten them out a little bit. So you could have applied bend modifier to a selection of bottom vertices and then to selection of top vertices and use different parameters, but it would be easier if you just scale it down along y-axis. Okay, now let's remove all the smoothing groups so we can read this object a little bit better. For that, I'm selecting all polygons and clicking clear all on the modify panel. Okay, now let's apply shell modifier to give it some thickness. Okay. Again, collapse it into editable poly. Now, what we need to do is, again, go to the top view, go to vertex of object mode, and let me see. Select these two vertices right here. Move them a little bit along y-axis. And select these two and move them like this. Okay, that's just going to help us a little bit with the next step, because for the next step we're going to apply taper modifier. So choose it from the modifiers list and just pick the right parameters so that you taper this object like this. The goal here is to make it a little bit narrower at the top and a little bit wider at the bottom, because all the stems that hold the leaves for the palm tree, they usually look like that. They starts as a wide stem, and then they go narrower toward the ends. Okay, so just adjust the parameters until you like the result. Something like this should be good. Now convert it into editable poly and go to edge subobject mode. Select all the vertical edges of this object. Just use the window selection, just like you see I did, and use the connect tool. Click the settings button next to connect button on the modify panel, and I'm going to bring up connect edges dialog. On that dialog, tell it that you want to create 3, 4, or 5 segments, and click OK. So that created new edges, horizontal edges to this object. You can see it's going to create them in, to create 5 additional segments. So now this object is ready to be smoothed out with Turbo Smooth modifier. So just apply Turbo Smooth modifier. I'm going to smooth this object out and see what problems we have right now. Is it finished or not? No, I think it's smoothing out the bottom and the top of the object too much. So we're going to fix that real quick. Go back to Editable Poly Object. Go to Edge Subobject Mode. Select these vertical edges at the top segment and click Connect button. Reset number of segments to 1 and use the slide parameter to slide these new edges very close to the top. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it better. Something like this. Click OK. Now scroll down to the bottom and do the same to the bottom selection of this bottom section of the object. So select all the vertical edges, click Connect button to bring up the Connect Edges dialog, and do the same. Adjust the slide parameters so that you create new edges close to the bottom end of the object like this. Click OK. Now you can see if we reapply Turbo Smooth, then object is going to look nice. So that's pretty much what we want. You can just do some fine adjustments, maybe see that the end, the very tip of this stem, it's a little bit thick for the palm tree or palm plant. So go to Vertex Subobject Mode and you can just scale these vertices down a little bit. So the stem is ready. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the next step. So let me continue from pre-saved file. So you see the same thing that you just saw 15 seconds ago. So we got the stem ready, and now for the next step we need to create a leaf. That leaf, should look like a palm leaf, and we're gonna copy this leaf on both sides of the stem to basically create one individual frond of the palm plant, because that frond later on we will distribute over some surface using hair and fur modifier to create some additional fronds, or I can call them branches, and then we're gonna apply some distortions to it. So let's go ahead and continue with creation of the leaf. Go to plane, go to create panel and create plane object. So create something like you see I created on my screen. Again, something relatively long and narrow, and it should have relative size to the stem object that we already created, like like you see I'm making on my screen, something like this. Okay, now with this, set number of length segments to 2. Let me zoom in so you can see it better. Set number of width segments to 14. So you have the object like this. So we're adding these segments so that this leaf can be bent and distorted, because if it was little, lower poly, we would see some large polygons. So this level of detail would be just fine. So okay, now we need to have some texture to see how it would be applied to this plane object, because right now you see it's rectangular, but the palm leaf is not rectangular. So of course we need to have some opacity map and diffuse, and this webinar is not about creating textures, so I'm just going to show you the textures already created. You can see I've got the diffuse map, I've got the opacity map and bump map, and all other maps that are related to the materials of this object. So basically at this stage we need to use only opacity map, because, and I'm going to apply it to the any channel of the material. So pick any empty material slot in the material editor. I'm going to use diffuse channel, so apply this bitmap to the diffuse channel of the material, so you can see how the texture is applied to this leaf, and you can see it's facing the wrong direction. So You can, of course, flip the texture in the material editor. You can, retexture it, apply a UVW map modifier, but I'm just going to do it even easier. I'm just going to rotate it 180 degrees, and that gives me a perfect idea how this leaf would look once all the materials applied, along with, opacity map. And now it's time to distribute this leaf object over the stem object. So this is something very simple. Before we do that, though, move the pivot point of this object here to the left end of this object, because that's where naturally the pivot point of the leaf is. And before we do anything else, this is very important. You'll see why in a few minutes. Convert this into editable poly. Go to Edge Subobject mode and select these two edges at the end of this leaf by which it's going to be connected to the stem. This is very important. This is going to save you time, and you'll see why in just a couple of minutes. So now continue and just create multiple copies of this leaf. I just do something like this, 220, and it's not enough, so I can add some more, maybe 5 more. Then you will have to just scale them, some of them, a little bit down here, because at the lower portion of this branch, the leaves are normally, not that well developed as they're in the middle, so they're going to be a little bit smaller. Then add some variety to the leaf by just randomly scaling some of them up, some of them down. And of course here at the top, leaves are going to look like they're going to be attached to the stem in this fashion. Maybe you can even delete some of them. Okay, so let's don't spend too much time doing that, because it's very straightforward process. Of course, just scale some of them down. And then when you did that, let me do a little bit better job here. Okay, something like this. Select each of these leaves individually and add just a little bit. Don't go too crazy on that. And rotate these leaves individually just a little bit. Again, just to create some distortion to this entire front, and just have some variety to it. So I'm going to do some real quick like this. And of course then try to rotate each of them a little bit in a different axis. So the goal here is to create the leaves on one side of this object and here at the top, so that later, not later, right now, you can select all these objects and mirror them along x-axis and create as a copy, and place them on the other side of the palm branch. So, and of course, you need to do something like this too. So at the end, we will have an object like this. So let me continue from pre-save file. When I invest a little bit more time creating this branch, and it's going to look like this. Let's take a look at it again. Okay, now this branch or frond, is ready for the next step. Now for the next step, here's what we want to do. This is important, and this is why we added those edges at the ends of the leaves. I'm going to hide the stem object. Now, remember we had these edges selected? Because we had this for first object, which we copied to create other copies of the leaves, each of them individually have edges selected at this left end and, at the right end on the left side of the stem correspondingly. So the point here is that now we need to attach all of these leaves together, and you can click attach button and go one by one manually, or you can just click this attach list button and select all the objects that you need to attach together in your scene. So now we have one editable poly object that represent the leaves. Now if I go to Edge Subobject mode, all of those edges at the end by which this leaf is attached to the stem are selected. Now do this while having the selection active. Hold Shift on the keyboard. I'm going to zoom in so you can see better what I'm doing. Hold Shift on the keyboard and drag the selection to the left just a little bit so it creates new edges and connect them with existing geometry with new polygons. And we got these very small polygons. Now hold Control on the keyboard and go to Vertex Subobject mode of this object. That's going to convert all these selected edges into the vertices. Then on the Modify panel, click Collapse button. It's going to collapse them, and you can see that we've got triangles at the end of those individual leaves. And you can click Collapse button one more time, and then it's going to collapse all those new vertices into just one. We did that so that now we can move these vertices down like this. Now bring up, if you had the stem hidden, like you see I'd hide it in my scene so that I can see the leaves a little bit better, make sure you bring it back, because when you move those vertices down, you don't want to go lower than the stem geometry. Make sure you don't leave it like this. Make sure you drag those vertices down approximately to this place, to almost the bottom end of the stem object. Now the reason why we did that is because these long and skinny polygons that we created, let me hide stem object temporarily again, they're going to help us to select all of those leaves, because at some point, again in a few minutes, you're going to see we will have to select all these leaves, and it will take us time to go one by one manually or use window selection, especially when many other objects are on the scene. These polygons, they're going to help us, because all we need to do is just select one vertex and go to Element Subobject mode while holding Control and all of them selected. So we'll talk more about it in a few minutes. Okay, now before we do anything else, go to Edge Subobject mode, and these polygons, these longs and very narrow polygons, they need to be subdivided. So go to Edge Subobject mode, just do the window selection, as you see I do on my screen, select all the vertical edges of those new polygons, and bring up Connect dialog and tell it that you want 5 segments or so. Now bring back the stem object, and now you can attach all elements of this branch together. So I just start with the stem, select stem, click attach, and attach this leaves object to it. So now we've got this front object finished, and it's ready to be distributed, scattered over some surface to create some additional branches. So before we do that, let's do the final step and move the pivot point of this object down, approximately right here, almost to the lower end of this object. So we've got something like this. Let's do a quick bend test just to see if this object is bending right. Okay, we already see some potential, right? Technically you can use this object just like that. If you need, just multiply, you just copy it several times and just rotate in z-axis. But of course we don't want to stop there, and we want to continue. So let me continue with another pre-saved file. So where you see this object, the one you saw 10 seconds ago, is present here on the scene. I switched to the I removed all the materials from this object so we can read it a little bit better, and I also merged the planter model from InterVisual's collection. This is not a complicated model. I just wanted to have something in my scene to judge at which distance I need to put the individual palm fronds from each other. So I'm gonna hide it temporarily. Actually, I'm gonna keep it on my screen for 1 minute because what I want to do next is I want to create a sphere object. So go to Create Panel and create a sphere object. Place it, use this planter, or you can create a cylinder or any other object to judge the size of the surface over which the individual fronts needs to be distributed. So I'm going to place the sphere right there. And now I'm going to adjust several parameters of the sphere. So go to Modify Panel and increase this hemisphere parameter so that sphere looks like this. Collapse it into editable poly and scale it down along y-axis so you can squish it a little bit, something like this. Okay, convert it into editable poly, move it a little bit lower in the planter or other reference object, and now I can hide the planter. Go and look at the bottom part of this hemisphere object that we just created. Go to Vertex Subobject mode, select this vertex at the bottom and delete it because we don't want to have any polygons at the bottom of this object. Okay, so now apply hair and fur modifier to this object, and that's the modifier we're going to use to populate the surface with these palm branches. So you can see once we applied that hair and fur modifier, it covered the surface with hair. And you can use the splines, you can use this 3ds Max hair objects, or you can tell this modifier that you want to use this instance instead of hair. So for example, you can see if I, here in the Modify panel, if I go to Tools Rollout and click this None button in the instance node group and pick my palm branch, you can see the surface of this object is populated with the little branches. Of course, that's not exactly what we want, but you can see where we're going with it. So I'll click this little cross to remove instance and get back to this hair appearance. And now we're going to change some settings of it. Well, first what we want to do, to go at the very low rollout, very bottom rollout of hair and fur modifier and uncheck display hairs parameter and bring back display guides checkbox. So guides are like a vectors that define the direction and the curvature of the growth of the hair, and we need to adjust the length and the curvature of them. So that can be done quickly with all of these hair styling tools that are available in a styling group. So click Style Hair button, and that's gonna enter into the hairstyling mode. Now uncheck this distance fade checkbox and drag the slider to the right to increase the size of the brush so that it definitely covers the entire surface that you're going to be hairstyling, something like this. Okay, now use the different tools right here, right below the slider, to adjust the look of these guides. So first what I want to do is click this Recomp button, and it's going to recomp all the guides. It's gonna sort of press them down over the surface, and it considers the gravity axis so they look properly. Okay, now use this Puff Roots tool to adjust the curvature a little bit. Use this Stand tool to adjust it even more. Then use this Translate tool to straighten it up along the screen y-axis a little bit, and make sure you have a steady hand when you're doing that, because you need to do it only along y-axis. Because see, if I'm doing this along y-axis, it looks like this. If my hand is a little bit shaky, geometry gonna look like this. Not the geometry, the guides. That's not what I want. So be very careful with it. If you did an error, just click this undo button and try to do it again. So the goal here to make them to look like this. Now, only thing that is left before we turn it into instances of the palm front, scale it up. So click the scale button and scale all these guides up so they are approximately as long as the individual frond. Something like this. Okay, now you can see if I click this instance node button right now and pick my individual palm leaf, palm branch, and then on the modify panel I uncheck display guides and brought back display hairs button, I'm gonna see all of these instances, scattered over the surface, and they respect the direction of the guides. So it's a little bit messy right now, so we're gonna fix it. Well, first of all, on the modify panel, go to freeze parameter and set freeze root and freeze tip to 0. So they're gonna look a little bit better. They're gonna look less, deformed, less distorted. Now, there's just too many of them because by default, when you pick any instance, the hair count changed to 75. So I'm gonna change it down to 15. And you can see we're getting closer to the good results. Now the problem is that these objects, they too narrow. So that can be fixed with a root thick parameter. Just increase it a little bit like this. Okay, so that looks about right. The only problem that these are facing the wrong way. All these individual branches, they sort of inverted. Now, in order to avoid, converting this into editable poly and then inverting, or I'm just going to take this object and rotate it 180 degrees and repick that instance on the hair and fur modifier. So I'm going to click Instance Node button and pick that instance. And of course, again, its number of hair count changed to 75. I'm going to change it down to 15. Okay, well, that looks about right. Now, it's not quite the result that we want. We want these branches to fall apart a little bit, to be falling, appears to be bent down under the forces of the gravity. And for that, we have a tool that can do this for us. And it can be found in Dynamics Rollout. And Dynamics Rollout, here you got the controls where you can tell this object, show me how it's going to behave under the forces of the wind or some other deformators in 3ds Max, or just under the forces of the gravity. You can see if I click live, I'm going to see it all live on my screen, and you can see these hair or branches in the quotes start falling apart and bend down. And that's already, you can see already where we're going with it. It's just the deformation itself is not really nice. It's because the set of parameters is not very, it's not exactly what we want. So I recommend to do this, to reset everything to 0 and start from there. You click live and you see it start falling down. We need to adjust root hold parameter a little bit, then add a little bit of gravity. So try to experiment with these parameters to get the feel of what they do, because the root hold is basically, it's just analogy of how strong hair is attached to, to the surface that has a hair. And by experimenting yesterday, I picked a set of parameters that will work in this case, and this would be 0.3, 0.14, something like this. Give it a little bit of time, maybe 15 seconds or so. And when you like the result, when you like the way these branches, these fronds look, the way they bend down, you can scroll up on the modify panel and click hair to mesh button. what it's going to do, it's going to convert all these hairs into the mesh. So I click hair to mesh. I can also, actually I need to switch it to none so there is no simulation going on. I can temporarily hide my hair and fur object, and this is my geometry that I just created. And we're gonna create 3 objects like this, and we're gonna use different parameters, different dynamics parameters. So we're gonna create 3 layers of the branches. One of them is gonna look like this. It's gonna be a middle layer. Another one we're gonna allow to bend down a little bit more, and another one we're gonna allow to bend a little less, so they create the top layer of the palm tree or palm plant. So I'm gonna show you how this, what to do with the single layer, and of course, you get the idea after that. So next, what we want to do, you see, after these hair objects turn into geometry, some of them placed not very good, because you see, let's say right here in this place, the 4 individual fronds, they just too piled up right here. They need to be fixed, because it's fine if you want if you want to hurry and you want to finish this object as quick as possible, but if you want it to look a little nicer, that needs to be fixed. So this is how we fix it. Convert it into editable poly. Now go to vertex subobject mode, and let's say I want to take this branch right here and put it in a different place. So on being in the vertex subobject mode, select just any vertex that belong to the stem of this individual frond, and select that vertex that belong to those long and skinny polygons that starts at the end of each individual leaf and goes down. Because now, you remember, I demonstrated it to you, you can hold Control on the keyboard, go to Element Subobject mode, and that automatically selects all the elements within this editable poly object that belong to that individual branch. And then you can rotate it or move it to another place, or you can even delete it if you want. See, you can push delete and it's deleted. Now if you want to rotate this object, make sure before you do this, because you see, if I try to rotate it, it's going to rotate each individual elements that is selected. Make sure you switch this pivot point, use pivot point center mode to this different mode when it's going to use the center of selection of elements. Just click and hold this button right here and choose the middle option. So now I can properly rotate it. So just rotate it, put in a different place where you see it's going to look a little, better when it's more suitable. Something like this. I'm sorry. Okay. So doing this, using this technique, just reposition each of these individual branches that you don't like and finish this entire middle layer. So I'm going to continue with pre-save file where I already finished that job, and that would be this geometry. Okay, so using that technique, do the same thing and create 2 additional layers. You can see that if I go back to this object that has a hair and fur applied, and I let it to run the simulation, but I changed parameters. I just added a little bit of gravity and reduce maybe a stiffness parameter. It's gonna fall beyond the point where the middle layer stops falling down under the forces of gravity. So something like this. So then go to Modify panel, scroll up and click Hair to Mesh. And it's going to create another layer for you. So use the same technique as I just demonstrated. Clean it up a little bit, delete branches that you don't like and maybe rearrange them a little bit. And then you will end up with a geometry like this. Let me show you the file where I already finished that. And it's going to look like this. And I separate each of these layers of branches with different colors, just for the sake of, better visual understanding. So it's going to look like this. Now this geometry, I call it raw geometry, is ready to be treated by cloth modifier to, like, let me show you a little reference image real quick. You can see that palm trees, some of the palm trees, like here, you can see the leaves, they are somewhat soft, and they bend down as well under the force of gravity. And with interior palm plants, you can very often observe the same effect. So this is why we're going to use cloth modifier. We want to automate this process. We don't want to do this manually. We don't want to bend each of these leaves individually and spend a lot of time doing this job for every branch. So this is what we do for that. So first of all, we need to clean out this raw mesh a little bit. So what I'm gonna demonstrate you from this point, I'm gonna demonstrate to the middle layer of the branches only, because we're limited on time. We have only one hour for this webinar, and if I do it with all layers, it's gonna take a little bit longer. But essentially, the process is the same for each of these three objects: the bottom layer, the middle layer, and the top layer. So I'm going to select this middle layer, and I'm going to isolate it so we can see a little bit better. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to elements of object mode and click each of these stems elements to select them and detach them. Click detach button and just give it some name, stem, middle, and you can then hide that object. So what you see left is our leaves and all of those long polygons at the bottom. Now do the following. I do it in the front view. Go to front view, go to vertex of object mode, and select all of those very last vertices at the lower ends of each of these branches, like that. Now I'm going to go to perspective view so you can see it better. While holding control on the keyboard, go to polygon subobject mode, and it's going to select all the polygons associated with those vertices, and click grow button to grow selection, and you can see that at some point this selection is going to spread to the leaves themselves. So do something like this. Again, hold control button and go to vertex subobject mode, so you're going to carry over the selection of the polygons into selection of the vertices attached to those polygons. Go back to polygon subobject mode. Now use the shrink button to deselect some of them, and now you can see that only polygons that are selected are those long and skinny polygons that we create in the very beginning and that are attached to the ends of each individual leaf, and delete them. We don't need them anymore. We use them only for the sake of having, you know, little easier way to select these polygons at the ends of the leaves and converting them into vertices. Why did we want to do that? Because once we apply cloth modifier, we need to tell it, please hold all these leaves by the selected vertices. So don't remove the select, don't unselect these vertices, just exit from vertex subobject mode. And now we need to go to polygon subobject mode and do this. Just using the window selection, select just one branch. Actually, go to element subobject mode, like this. And copy the selection of these elements. Just I hold shift and drag it, and it's going to ask me if I want to create element or object. Just create object. Doesn't matter what name it have, because we're going to run some tests on it and then we're going to delete it. So click OK, exit from subobject mode, and now we're going to work with this object. We're going to find the right parameters. We find a good class modifiers parameters that gonna make these individual leaves look nice, and then we're gonna transfer those parameters to this larger object. So go ahead and apply class modifier to this object, and of course go to object properties and tell it that you want it to have a class properties. So click this class option and pick some preset. I recommend to start with wool presets. Click OK, and if we click simulate local button, it's gonna simulate this this object that's considered to be a class object right now, and you can see it's all falling down because it's not connected to any fixed object in a space. It looks nice, but it's not what we want. So exit from a simulate local mode, click reset state, and go to groups of object mode of class modifier. And here's why we needed to select all those vertices, because remember on an editable poly object we have a selection of vertices, because here in the groups of object mode of class modifier you can click this get stack selection button, and it's gonna carry over selection of vertices from the editable poly object to the class modifier, this groups of object mode. Now you can assign this selection of vertices into the groups. I'm gonna click make group button, doesn't matter what name it have because we can create only one group. Click OK and click preserve button. So by doing so, you tell in class modifier, please don't do anything to these vertices. Please keep them fixed in a space. Now if you see, if I run the simulation, it's gonna look like this. It's behaving as a class. It doesn't look quite as a palm branch, but you see where we're going with it, because right now you can reset this simulation, go to object properties and change some parameters. You know, it definitely requires some experimenting. So if you want, you can go to 3ds Max help file and see what these parameters means, because some of them can control the stretching of individual polygons. Some of them controlling the resistance of the shape to the bending forces. Some of them controlling the how quickly it reacts to the external forces, how quickly cloth come to rest. So change these parameters. So let's say I want to change this one to 85,000. Click OK and run the simulation. You can see that particular U-bend parameter makes this cloth a little bit more resistant to the bending. And if I increase it to 400,000, it's going to be even more resistive to the bending. So now there is also a parameter called gravity. Right now it's 980. I recommend for this particular case, use 160. So that's gonna help to keep this object, not to bend that much. So reset. It's gonna run a little bit slower, but result is gonna look nicer. Let's give it 15 seconds and see what happened. Okay, so something like that already looks nice. If we let it to run to calculate simulation a little bit longer, it's gonna look even nicer. So I'm gonna stop simulation right now, and what I want to do next, of course, I want to save these parameters now, because once you apply class modifier to another object, it's not going to remember all of these parameters that you just set. So make sure you save the set of parameters. Just click Save button and save it to some preset. So I already saved it yesterday, and I call mine medium layer. So I'm going to use that preset for another object. So okay, and now last step in the simulation would be to even add more distortion to all these leaves. So I'm doing that with the wind forces. I'm sorry, with the space warp object called wind. So let's add the space warps wind object, position it just right here and make it face down. So now I can add this wind object to the simulation. Here I need to click this cloth forces button and make sure I'm using it. So select it, transfer it to this window, click OK. Now you can see if I continue running the simulation, I can interactively change these parameters of the wind object. So let me open pre-save file for that so I don't spend too much time trying to find the right parameters. Right here. And it's definitely going to take you, 5 or 10 minutes of experimenting with the different parameters. And let me show you what happens here. So, and the way I do it, I usually click Simulate button. Remember, when you click Simulate Local, it's going to do the it's going to do the calculation, and you will have to babysit it for a little while. And when you see this object takes a right shape, you can stop simulation, and then you can add wind to it. I don't want to babysit this process, so what I do, and I recommend you do the same, set number of frames in your 3ds Max. And by the way, we are very close to the end, so it's going to take us maybe 5-10 more minutes to finish this exercise. So what you want to do is you want to set number of frames of your 3ds Max scene to something larger than 100 is what you have by default. I set it to 1000, or you can set it to even 2000, and then you click Simulate button, and it's gonna calculate the simulation, but it's gonna keep it for every individual frame. So you can do something like this. You can then see how it simulates, see this behavior of this object as a cloth. The reason why this is very helpful is because, let's say I don't want it to come to rest all the way to this state. Let's say I like it the way it looks right here. So I can convert this into editable poly at this state. So plus, you don't need to babysit this calculation process. You can just run it. You have 5-10 minutes of your time. Just go grab a tea or coffee and then come back later, and you're not going to lose this calculation. So what happened is that you calculate this, then you can add the wind object to the calculation, and then increase number of frames again, maybe give it 100 more frames, because for this particular case I calculated 600 frames. When you click the Simulate button on the Modify panel, just here in the simulation parameters, tell it that you want to calculate 600 or 1000 in your case frames, and click this checkbox. So then once you add the wind to the simulation, click Simulate button again, and it's going to add some more frames to this calculation of the cloth simulation. Just let it calculate 5-10 more frames, and what you see happen here is that this wind that we brought into the simulation process adds the distortion to this object. See, I start simulation originally, and all of these leaves, they fell down under the force of gravity. They come to rest like this, and then after frame 600, I added wind to the simulation, and wind brought some chaotic distortion to it, something really nice, something that would take you quite more time if you want to do it manually. But here with the class modifier can be done real quickly. That's pretty much what we want, and this object can be converted into editable poly. And once we apply material, this particular branch would look nice, but that's not exactly what we want. We wanted to run simulation with this selection, this particular individual branch, so that we can memorize all the parameters and transfer them into this entire middle layer of the branches. So I'm going to open the file where that simulation is already finished. Let's give it 15 seconds or so to load. Okay, the reason why it took these files that long to load is because when you run the simulation by clicking the simulate button and calculating simulation for every individual frame, this information is then stored within the max file that you save. And apparently it's gonna, use some hard drive space, because it essentially remembering every individual vertex position of the subject for every frame. So anyways, what happened here is that now I took those parameters that I found running tests with one individual branch, and I transferred them to this object that has many more branches in it, and I did the same thing. I defined a group, and then I click preserve button to tell these group of vertices, and I told these vertices, please don't be changed by the class modifier, just stay fixed in a space. And then I applied class modifier, sorry, right here, and then that preset that I saved, I clicked load button and loaded it. So I got my parameters right here. I made sure that the gravity is still 160. Sometimes when you remove class modifier and apply it to another object, the gravity is getting reset back to 980. So make sure it's 160. So, and then I just clicked simulate button and calculated 1000 frames. And you can see they already calculated for this scene. So I'm gonna run it real quick. That what happened. I gave it some time. It took, I don't know, probably 10-15 minutes. And I let it calculate 1000 frames, because you see, even though it doesn't move much, but still there is something going on with the calculation. I want all these leaves completely or almost completely come to rest. So something like this looked nice, and all I needed to do after that is just to add force, wind force to this calculation, and click simulate button again and let it calculate 3, 4, 5 more frames. So let's give 15 seconds and see what happens. Okay, we can click cancel now, and we only need 3 or 4 frames, because you see wind, once it starts participating in a simulation, it brings distortion to the subject real quick. So just few frames is enough. See, that's pretty much what we want, and you repeat this procedure for other layers of this object, or particularly speaking to this bottom layer and this top layer. Do the same thing, detach stems, then use the long polygons that comes from the ends of each leaves down to the bottom of the stem. Use that geometry to select some polygons here at the roots of the leaves, convert the selection into vertices, then delete those long polygons that we created in the beginning of the process, because we no longer need them. Then apply class modifier, make sure you define a group of vertices which you then tell to be preserved in space, then run the simulation and add wind to it, and you will end up with a shape like this. So this is the object that you will get at the end. So everything looks nice, and only thing left to do here is to apply materials to it. So let me open the scene where all the materials applied. All right, something like this. Let me zoom a little closer. You can see the diffuse map is applied to the leaf. If I bring back, if I want to see the opacity map, you can read all these leaves a little better. So, and if you bring this object into the scene and render it, and I did a couple quick renderings yesterday, so I can, not just show you the geometry in the viewport, I can give you some idea how it renders in, in an actual scene. I just used one of my interior scenes, brought it there and did a quick render. Here's exactly the object that you just saw on your screen in 3ds Max. This object renders like this. You can see it looks nice. We got a lot of branches, and it can be done. Apparently right now I'm taking some time to explain to you what I'm doing, but this entire object can be done in 40 minutes. So, or using the same technique, here's another object, just not that dense. The density is a little bit lower, a little less stems in the leaves. Or you can just do one layer of the palm branches, and it's going to look like this. Now let me explain to you how you can do the same palm tree, but you're definitely noticing how some palm plants or palm trees that not necessarily have the leaves that are this soft, not the leaves that bend down under the forces of the gravity. There are some palm trees that have leaves like that, but there are some that have, let me show you a couple reference images, like this one, for example. The leaves are really, really rigid. They maintain their shape, and they don't bend down under the forces of gravity. So the palm tree like that can be done even easier. So let me show you a couple files and how you can do that. For example, you still need to go through the same process. You need to create a stem, you need to create individual leaf, you need to populate that leaf over the sides of the stem. But the only difference that in this case you use much less polygons for individual leaf. You do something like that. Let me just move one aside. You do the shape like this. There's 3 large polygons and 3 small polygons at the side of the object by which it's going to be attached to the stem. So then from that moment you do all the same that you saw I did for the previous type of the palm. You add the long and skinny polygons to the end of the leaves because we're going to use them to help us to select some polygons here. Then you use hair and fur modifier, or with palm like that it's even easier to use hair and fur modifier, because let me open this other file. Again, it's got this distribution object with hair and fur modifier applied, and you see I already modified some guides. You don't even need to run the dynamics calculation because it already looks nice. Look, if I pick instance, actually it's already here. If I display hairs, you can see that this object is already looking nice. I don't need to break it down by layers. I don't need to run the dynamics calculation. It just already looks nice. And then when you do the class simulation, let me do this real quick. I'm going to set number of leaves to 1, and I'm going to convert it into edit hair to mesh, so I get this mesh. And I do this real quick. I detach stem. I'm going to hide it. And then you again go to vertex subobject mode, select these vertices at the bottom, hold Control, go to polygon subobject mode, click grow button, and grow the selection of polygons until it carries over to the leaves geometry, something like this. Hold Control, go back to vertex subobject mode, and we got the selection of vertices. Go back to polygon subobject mode, shrink selection, and delete those unneeded polygons. Now you see we've selected vertices at the ends of each individual leaf. in this fashion, so that now we can apply cloth modifier and turn it into cloth, give it some cloth properties, and yeah, let's start with wool preset. Click OK and go to group subobject mode, get stack selection, assign those vertices to the group, click preserve. So now if I run simulation, it's not, the vertices, they not move in space. And you can see that if you increase this parameter to maybe 400,000, the leaves would look like this. See, they're really strong, they don't bend. The only thing you want to do here different from the previous type of palm tree is that you don't need to have any gravity in the scene, because these leaves, like here in the reference image, you don't need gravity really there. So uncheck gravity, add wind to the simulation, and calculate just several frames. So it breaks down the evenness of all these leaves, so you have some variety to it. So something like this, and can be done even faster, and as a result you'll get a palm tree like this. Again, I finished it and placed it in some simple interior scene. See, it looks nice, looks very decent, and again can be done relatively quick. Okay, well, that will conclude this webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. My name is Alex Gorbunov, and I'll see you next time.